Kevin Pelton, ESPN, NBA writers in the house is the Sixers and the Nets. We got this great matchup, except for the Nets decided not to show up tonight. We'll talk more about it in the Eastern Conference playoff race with Kevin now here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Kevin, good to see you, man. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Well, some of the Nets will be there.
Not many. No Durant, no Blake Griffin, no LaMarcus Aldridge, and, of course, we know no Harden. What's the message from the Nets here tonight? They had a chance to play Durant tonight and not the other night. So what are they telling NBA executives, teams? What's the message from them tonight about, we got a number one seed on the line. We'll sit these Durant.
Well, I think the message number one is that getting to the playoffs healthy is a bigger priority than where we're seated going into the playoffs, which, I think is an approach that a lot of teams are probably going to take over the last month of this season here in terms of not pushing players. And, Durant was an interesting choice because presumably he could have played one half of the back-to-back. The one thing we don't know is, to what extent their medical staff advised them that it was better for him to play on Tuesday when they were already in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, as opposed to today after the travel day. That could have been a factor in their decision. But yeah, this was certainly a more important game when you look at the tiebreaker and the ability to not only get a win, but also give the Sixers a loss than yesterday's game against the Timberwolves was going to be for them. So it's a bit surprising from that standpoint.
Right. Kevin, you got three teams in play essentially for the one seed, but two of them are tied right now. The other one's 3.5 back. I would imagine these final 15, 20 games, I think we're like 19 games left for Philly and Brooklyn, that jockeying for the one seed is the biggest story because the one seed doesn't have to play the three seed in the playoffs. So the number one seed in the East, does it not matter or does it?
I think it definitely does. And exactly for that reason you laid out, because, even above and beyond the home court advantage, if you have 1 and 2 meeting in the conference finals, it seems especially important this year because of the gap between the top 3 teams in the East that have established themselves and everyone else. But, to the same point about the importance of seeding, Milwaukee also does not necessarily seem to be pushing for the number 1 seed or even the number 2 seed as hard as they could be. We've seen Giannis Antetokounmpo miss an extended period of time here with the knee soreness, and they've also had a couple of games now where they've basically rested all of their starters.
Well, they've been burned in the past by pushing too hard. Now they've gone the other side here. But, all right, those are the 3. Who's the 4th? And does the 4th matter?
I do think it matters in terms of that team's going to win a playoff series and test whoever gets the number 1 seed in the second round. My answer in this has changed from yesterday, which is maybe overly reactive from that standpoint, but we had a 5-on-5 that we did yesterday on ESPN.com, and all of us chose the Miami Heat. But after seeing Boston back up their 2 or 3 game winning streak, I think 3 game winning streak with a strong effort last night in Portland, that one could have gone either way. Jason Tatum making a key basket in the final 30 seconds to get them the win there. But, that was another solid performance. Boston is probably more higher. Well, it's close in terms of higher end talent, I guess, but if you go 1 through 6 on the Celtics, I think I would take that group over Miami. It's Miami's kind of 7 and below that would be the argument for the Heat. So, now that Boston is playing a bit more like we expected coming into this season, I'm going to take them.
All right. I say often, Kevin, you have to have a player that can be the best player on the best team to win a title. I see right now 5 of those guys: LeBron, Kawhi, Giannis, KD, Joel Embiid. Is he in the 5?
For sure. Yeah, the other question we got asked there is who's the best player in the Eastern Conference, which is a loaded question because what does best player mean? Over the course of the 82-game regular season, I think Giannis and Harden are often the most valuable players in the East. Kevin Durant certainly could establish himself as that best player come playoff time. I think before he got hurt in 2019, he would have been at that top of the group. But the way that Joel Embiid has played all season long, the kind of dominance that he's had both in the paint and with his face-up game from the mid-range, the ability to make contributions on both ends. If you're playing one game today, Joel Embiid is my top pick in the Eastern Conference.
Right, I was going to say, so for this year right now, they got Durant, they got Harden, they got Kyrie, but do the Sixers have the best player?
I think they do, although what you would say is that the gap is not very large, and that Brooklyn has, two players that belong in that conversation. Kyrie is not far beyond it. So I do think the Nets have the most talented roster, and the Sixers are, to an extent, I think, betting on the fit of their shooters around Joel Embiid to overcome the sheer talent.
So if this game was going on at full blast tonight, both teams had full capacity. How do you like the matchup between Philly, who's a defensive-minded team who can score, against the Nets, who obviously are a score-first team? Does Philly have the defensive makeup to combat these three terrific scores, and then their, these veteran cast-offs that they've added?
From a personnel standpoint, yes, Philly certainly does. I mean, I think the matchups look favorable on that end. To me, the biggest question in this series, I mean, number one, I guess I would say is, as well as they match up, no one's going to shut down Brooklyn's three stars. That's why the Nets are as good as they are and as exciting a team in the playoffs as they are. The fundamental question, I think, of a possible Nets-Sixers playoff series as we see them is, can the Nets either slow down Joel Embiid enough or, create problems for him at the other end with their shooting and quickness to make up that disadvantage at the other end of the court? And I don't know that we're going to get a real answer to that. Presumably a big part of the reason they wanted LaMarcus Aldridge is that he gives them that option of someone who can, pick and pop Joel Embiid on the offensive end, but also brings enough size to match up with him defensively, as opposed to going small and putting Jeff Green or Kevin Durant at center.
Kevin Pelton, NBA writer for ESPN. He's host of the Pelton Cast tonight, Sixers Nets. Over the years, Kevin, we've talked a lot about Ben Simmons and his offense and this and that. When you watch the Sixers now, do you feel that they have kind of told him, don't worry about the offense, and have elevated Tobias Harris as that secondary offensive player, where maybe Brett Brown in the past wanted Ben Simmons to be the secondary offensive player? Has this regime maybe said, you don't need to be the second offensive guy?
I mean, definitely that stretch where Embiid was out of the lineup and Tobias Harris was as productive offensively as he was, he became the go-to guy offensively during that stretch. I do think the Sixers are probably at their most difficult to defend when Simmons is aggressively looking for his own offense. We saw that period of, whether it was approximately a month before the All-Star game, when he was super aggressive and how effective he was. And I would love to get him back to that point. But I don't know that you necessarily need it to be successful in the playoffs because of the fact that you've got Harris and Embiid to carry a lot of the load offensively.
So watching Tobias Harris this year, Kevin, are you seeing a different Tobias Harris? He's been a good player. He's been a 19-point player guy. He's right about the same average, but is he different?
I think certainly as compared to last season, his efficiency and the ability to create his own shot without sacrificing efficiency are two places he's taken a step forward. And that's, really what distinguishes star players often in this league.
All right. A lot of people have commented today as we're on the live stream and the chat coming in, and people say, hey, people are discounting Milwaukee. So is it Philly and Brooklyn, or is Milwaukee equal or maybe better than those teams?
I mean, I think it's funny because even though Milwaukee is clearly not having anything close to the regular season they had the last 2 years, I think it's possible they're better built for the playoffs with the addition of Drew Holiday and taking Eric Bledsoe and his issues as an outside shooter out of the mix. We have seen them at times kind of get up to that level. I think of the Milwaukee Clippers game that was nationally televised on a Sunday afternoon, and that seemed like a real test for the Bucks, a close game. And, their version of Tobias Harris is probably Chris Middleton, who's been asked to do a lot more of the playmaking late in games than he was in past years, where it was really running through Giannis. And then in the playoffs, teams were able to build a wall around the paint, dare the Bucks outside shooters to make them pay, and have success that way. It's a little more difficult to do that against Middleton for the same reasons as kind of the Harris-Simmons combination in Philly. So I think it's a possibility it could be a stronger Milwaukee team than we saw in the last two playoffs. And they did get to the conference finals in 2019. Like, everyone thinks of them as complete playoff washouts, but they won the first two games of that series. Were very close to going up 3-0 on Toronto in the conference finals that year, and who knows how different history was. So yeah, I think they absolutely should be in that mix. But if you're the 3 seed and you have to go through both Brooklyn and Philadelphia without home court advantage in either of those series, that's a huge uphill task.
Agree. Kevin Pelton's with us, ESPN NBA writer. I'll leave you with this. George Hill has not played. Is he a big enough addition to make a big enough difference come playoff time?
I guess we'll see is the cop-out answer on that. I think that of the guys who went to legitimate contenders, Denver pushed themselves into that group with the addition of Aaron Gordon, and unfortunately probably is now out of it with Jamal Murray's ACL injury. But if you take Denver out of the mix, of the guys who went to legit championship contenders, George Hill is probably the best player of that group at the deadline. So I'm excited to see, how he looks physically when he's able to get back on the court, how well he fits in this group. But, his skill set, his ability to knock down open shots, defend multiple positions, that's a pretty seamless fit. I don't know that you need, a full 2 months to get him integrated ahead of the playoffs.
Yeah, that should be interesting to see what they do there. Very good defensive player. So that would be another interesting piece to add to the whole Sixers-Knicks Nets dynamic. So at this point right now, Nets your favorite, or are you taking the other 7 and somebody of that 7 gets out?
Yeah, this was another question that came up on ESPN.com yesterday, and I would go with the field at this point. I think the Nets are the favorites for sure, but especially when you consider that for the reasons we've talked about, Philly is the favorite now to get the number 1 seed, and the advantages that's going to convey this year. I definitely don't think I could go over 50% for the Nets at this point.
All right. Well, I know tonight lost a little luster, but still should be fun. Sixers Nets, Sixers Clippers Friday, Sixers Warriors Monday, Sixers Suns on Wednesday, and oh, by the way, Sixers Bucks back-to-back next week as well. So the Sixers continuing this stretch of games, and somehow they've gotten through it, still holding on to that number 1 seed. They got Sixers Nets tonight right here on 97.3 ESPN. Kevin Pelton, the NBA writer from ESPN. Check out his podcast, The Pelton Cast. Great NBA stuff. They're 5 for 5 on the Eastern Conference playoffs. Check that out as well over at ESPN.com. Kevin, good to see you, man.
Thanks for having me.
All right. He, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline.